Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome to Autonova. Remember to like and subscribe to support the journey. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of A Will Eternal. Bai Xiaochun moved so incredibly fast that Chen Heng didn't have time to react. Punches and kicks instantly turned into a maddening storm of attacks. Chen Heng's expression was extremely unsightly as he performed incantation gestures to summon protective shields. Rain pelted down in the jungle, and booms echoed out as he fought with Bai Xiaochun. The battle so far left Chen Heng dumbfounded. Earlier, he had already acknowledged that this particular outer sect disciple of the Spirit Stream sect was formidable, but it wasn't until actually fighting that it became clear how much he had underestimated him. To be able to slaughter over 10 of his fellow clan members, including cultivators in the 8th level of Qi condensation, with seeming ease, indicated he had a high level of skill. That was not something that an ordinary Qi condensation disciple could do. The Spirit Stream sect was one of the great sects, so it was expected that their disciples would surpass the local cultivator clans in terms of latent talent, but he had never imagined that the disparity would be like this. His fleshly body is too resilient. What body refinement technique does he use? Don't tell me that his power and speed are both a result of body refinement? Chen Heng flicked his sleeve, sending a fog rolling out to defend against Bai Xiaochun. Bai Xiaochun ignored any potential injuries as he attacked again. At the same time, Chen Heng's face grew more and more pale. Most terrifying are his powers of recovery. If his cultivation base were at the 8th level of Qi condensation, I wouldn't be a match for him at all. Chen Heng couldn't imagine how someone could receive so many injuries, and yet still be able to unleash such explosive power. Virtually anyone else who was on the receiving end of such punishment would have long since passed out. Unfortunately, Bai Xiaochun was like an oil lamp running out of oil, just barely holding on. I need to get this battle done with and kill him, Chen Heng thought, eyes glittering coldly. That way no other complications will arise. However, it was at this point that Bai Xiaochun's eyes also glittered, and he suddenly fell back, performing a double-handed incantation gesture. Violet Qi cauldron summoning sent a huge cauldron rumbling toward Chen Heng. Chen Heng's eyes narrowed as the fog which surrounded him transformed into a huge hand that shot toward the cauldron. The two collided, and the cauldron instantly collapsed, as if it hadn't been backed by even the smallest bit of power. Chen Heng instantly realized that he had been fooled, but he didn't seem fazed at all, and in fact his eyes glinted sharply. Red Devil Grand Magic, he said coolly. Immediately, massive amounts of red light shone out, and his skin turned crimson. Even as that happened, Bai Xiaochun leapt into the air and swung his left leg toward Chen Heng in a powerful arcing kick which kicked up a huge wind. Chen Heng chuckled coldly, thrusting his right forearm out to block the kick. Boom! A sound like thunder rang out, accompanied by cracking sounds. Tears streamed down Bai Xiaochun's face as he staggered back, heart thumping. How did this guy get so strong so fast, he thought. Red Devil Grand Magic? His skin is red, and now he's way more powerful. Bai Xiaochun was in so much pain that his heart was shaking. His left leg was twisted at an odd angle, and although his skin remained intact, the flesh underneath was mangled, and bones were broken. His breathing was ragged, and he was exhausted. Each time his injuries worsened, Bai Xiaochun felt as if he couldn't go on any further. By this point he had come to the realization that his body was constantly fixing itself. The strange regenerative power ensured that even the most serious of injuries were slowly healed. He wasn't sure, but guessed that it might be an outworking of the Undying Live Forever technique. Chen Heng's right arm seemed to be fine, but closer examination would reveal that it was shaking. His skin was even redder than before, and the bones inside were broken. You have your body refinement technique, and so does my Luokan clan. Chen Heng began to advance with speed that seemed even greater than Bai Xiaochun's. It was almost like he was a different person, a person with boundless power at his disposal. In the blink of an eye, fierce fighting was once again underway within the jungle. Booms rang out constantly. Bai Xiaochun's right leg was seriously hurt, and the bones of his left leg were broken. He could barely stand straight, and was suffering setback after setback. The sensation of imminent death grew stronger. This Chen Heng was by far the most powerful opponent Bai Xiaochun had ever fought. Bai Xiaochun's eyes were bloodshot as his right hand shot out. Black light shone as the throat-crushing grasp was unleashed, like a bolt of black lightning that shot toward Chen Heng's throat. Chen Heng's eyes shone with an intense light when he realized that this was a move he had seen before and was prepared to face. Red light flashed around him as Bai Xiaochun's right hand closed in. Chen Heng reached out casually, grabbed Bai Xiaochun's right hand, then crushed it hard. Cracking sounds rang out as Bai Xiaochun's hand was completely shattered. Chen Heng frowned, he hadn't expected things to be this simple. But then his heart seized as he thought about the vicious tactics Bai Xiaochun had already used in the fighting, and how he would even allow himself to be injured in order to unleash a devastating attack. Chen Heng instantly pushed back, and especially tried to move his neck out of the way. At the same time, Bai Xiaochun's left hand shone with black light, shooting past Chen Heng's neck and latching onto his shoulder. The power of the throat-crushing grasp erupted, and a cracking sound rang out. Chen Heng's face was ashen, and sweat was pouring down his face. The bones of his left shoulder instantly shattered, and the intense pain caused him to let out a bellow of rage. Red light shimmered around him as he unleashed massive power, grabbing Bai Xiaochun's left hand. Although Bai Xiaochun was inclined to pull his hand back, Chen Heng was too fast, and in an instant, his hand locked onto Bai Xiaochun's. Die, he howled, eyes bloodshot as he performed an incantation gesture with his left hand and then reached out to tap Bai Xiaochun's forehead. Bai Xiaochun's eyes flickered with a vicious gleam as he suddenly leaned to the side, allowing the bones in his left hand to snap as his right leg shot through the air and slammed into Chen Heng's body. Blood sprayed out of Chen Heng's mouth, and he was sent tumbling backward, with no choice other than to release his grip on Bai Xiaochun. That in turn allowed Bai Xiaochun to fall back at high speed. Within an instant, roughly 30 meters of space opened up between the two of them. Bai Xiaochun's hands were both crippled. His right arm was mangled, and although the left one was intact, his twisted fingers were incapable of unleashing the throat-crushing grasp. Both of his legs were shaking. The left one was distorted into an odd shape, and blood soaked his right leg. The kick he had just unleashed had come with a terrible price. He could barely stand up, and was in fact forced to lean back against one of the towering trees. He bit down on his tongue to force himself from lapsing into unconsciousness. He was now at his very limit. The only limb he could actually move was his left arm. Everything was numb, and yet, he still looked like he wanted to fight. As for Chen Heng, his eyes were bright red. His left shoulder felt like it was on fire, and he couldn't even lift his right hand. Several of his ribs were broken, and blood oozed constantly out of his mouth. I underestimated you, he said hoarsely, glaring at Bai Xiaochun. He could never have imagined that with a cultivation base like his own, it would be so difficult to kill the injured Bai Xiaochun. From the look of it, Bai Xiaochun's body refinement practices had led to some sort of undying secret magic that kept him alive despite such serious injuries. In fact, to deal with him, Chen Heng had used almost every magical technique at his disposal, even the Red Devil Grand Magic. Alright, it's time to end this fight. Chen Heng took a deep breath. Suddenly, all of the redness in his skin seemed to evaporate, transforming into a mist that rose up into the air. Normal color rapidly returned to Chen Heng's skin, and he seemed to weaken dramatically. The fight had been a difficult one even for Chen Heng. His opponent's tenacious desire to stay alive, his shocking restorative powers, and his willingness to sustain damage to inflict fatalities was completely shocking. Red Devil Secret Magic, Blood Saber. Attack. Chen Heng bit down on his tongue and spit out a mouthful of blood. The blood merged into the blood mist from moments ago, which then roiled and, in the blink of an eye, transformed into a long, blood-colored saber. The illusory saber was over 3 meters long and, shockingly, was covered with innumerable faces, all of which were emitting torturous screams. Chen Heng waved his finger, and the blood-colored saber began to move toward Bai Xiaochun. Utilizing this secret magic caused Chen Heng to sag again in weakness, and he was forced to reach out and support himself on a nearby tree. His face was ashen, and some of his hair had even turned white. Die, he growled, giving Bai Xiaochun an enraged stare. An unprecedented sensation of crisis exploded up within Bai Xiaochun as he realized that no matter what he tried to do, he would not be able to dodge or evade this blow. He was stuck. A crevice snaked toward him on the ground, and the tree behind him withered as the long, blood-colored saber rose up high, and then slashed down toward him. Bai Xiaochun trembled, and his pupils constricted. He didn't want to die, and in fact was terrified of it. Unfortunately, the regenerative properties of his undying live forever technique weren't so heaven-defying that they could keep up with his current injuries. However, even as the blade descended, a sudden bit of inspiration flashed in his mind. Without the slightest hesitation, he waved his left hand, and a black beam of light shot out. In the blink of an eye, it grew larger, right there in front of him, forming into the shape of a wok. It was none other than the turtle wok. As soon as the wok appeared, the blood-colored blade slashed down onto it, and a deafening boom rang out. The blood-colored blade began to vibrate violently, and then shattered into countless pieces. As for the turtle wok, not even the slightest crack appeared on its surface, although the force of the attack transformed it into a black beam of light that shot back inside of Bai Xiaochun. Impossible. A tremor ran through Chen Heng, and he coughed up a mouthful of blood, an incredulous look on his face. He had already been in a weakened state when unleashing the magic, and now that it was broken, the backlash power slammed into him, instantly evaporating his spiritual power and turning his vision dim. What is that thing? A turtle shell, you bastard. Bai Xiaochun growled as he stood there, clinging onto life. Blood oozed out of the corners of his mouth, and he rocked back and forth as he stood there. He stepped back, sliding down the trunk of the tree into a sitting position, and began to laugh bitterly. Too bad I don't have any weapons. He could sense his life force fading away, and his vision was swimming. He thought of summoning his wooden sword, but simply didn't have the energy. Calling forth the turtle wok had taken the last scrap of spiritual power he had. He couldn't even open his bag of holding. I don't care what secrets you hold, once you're dead, everything you have will belong to me. Chen Heng said, breathing raggedly. He was also like an oil lamp on the verge of sputtering out, although he was in a slightly better position than Bai Xiaochun. After a few breaths of time passed, he struggled to his feet and produced a long sword from his bag of holding, hefted it, and began to walk toward Bai Xiaochun. Bai Xiaochun looked at him silently, eyes somewhat blank. He thought back to life in his village, and then he thought about Big Fatty Zhang. He recalled Li Qinghao, the Spirit Stream sect, and the other amazing people he knew. Du Lingfei, Hu Yunfei, Hu Xiaomei. Chen Heng slowly approached, then looked down at Bai Xiaochun, who was already emanating a powerful aura of death. He could see that Bai Xiaochun was riddled with wounds, and that he didn't even have enough spiritual energy to open his bag of holding. Remember my name. I'm the person who killed you. Chen Heng of the Luokan clan. He raised the sword, which he normally could send flying out with the flick of a sleeve, but now seemed extraordinarily heavy. It's a wonderful feeling being able to kill a chosen. Chen Heng was so tired that he was on the verge of passing out, but his eyes glinted with cruelty as he stabbed the sword down toward Bai Xiaochun's chest. However, even as he did that, Bai Xiaochun suddenly swung his left arm, slamming it into the ground. The bones snapped, and one of them even pierced out through his skin by about 3 inches. Then he lurched to his feet, propelling his left arm with the last bit of energy he had. Even as the sword stabbed into his chest, his arm slammed into Chen Heng's neck, and the bone pierced directly into his throat. Then Bai Xiaochun fell to the ground and, energy completely spent, lapsed into total unconsciousness. A tremor ran through Chen Heng. Everything had happened too quickly, giving him no time to prepare or react, and he had been too exhausted to dodge. Once the bone stabbed into his neck, blood began to pour out onto the ground. He tried to cover the wound, but it did no good. He stared down at his own blood on the jagged bones which protruded from Bai Xiaochun's arm, and couldn't help but marvel at how ridiculous the situation was. It didn't even seem possible. Eyes flickering with an unyielding gleam, he thought about all of his goals and pursuits in life, and then laughed a bitter laugh. That was your dying blow, huh? He staggered back and toppled to the ground, dead, his eyes staring up into the sky. Deep within the jungle of the nameless mountain range, the rainfall eventually began to lighten. Around evening, it stopped, and the setting sun just managed to create a little bit of a rainbow. However, as the sun set, the rainbow gradually faded away. The jungle was quiet, even the stench of blood had vanished. However, the corpse-lined path stretching backward bore testament to the deadly fighting which had played out. As Chen Heng slipped away into death, his eyes continued to shine with an unyielding, incredulous expression. Next to his corpse, Bai Xiaochun lay still and unmoving. The flame of his life force was roughly 90% extinguished, with only a little spark left behind, struggling to stay alive. Eventually, footsteps could be heard from off in the distance. Someone was walking through the muddy rainwater and fallen leaves, to eventually come to a stop next to Chen Heng. It was an old man wearing a long black robe. He had flowing white hair, and his face was covered with wrinkles, making him seem profoundly ancient. Apparently, he had lived for so long that an aura of death was already seeping out from him. Intense focus has bolstered his soul. He's dead, and yet his soul hasn't dispersed. But that won't last for long. The man's voice was raspy, but also vague and bizarre as it echoed out into the jungle. Suddenly, the forehead of Chen Heng's corpse split open, and a green wisp of qi floated out. It swirled together in midair, forming into the blurry image of a soul, about the size of the palm of a hand. This was Chen Heng, although his eyes were blank and he was trembling, as if his mind and consciousness were gone. The old man extended a finger, and Chen Heng's soul flew toward him and disappeared inside. After taking away Chen Heng's soul, the mysterious old man looked over at Bai Xiaochun, mixed emotions playing out on his face. He even seemed to be reminiscing about the past. I never imagined that I would once again lay eyes on the undying live forever technique. He closed his eyes for a moment and then sighed. That sound seemed to transform his surroundings. Time seemed to suddenly flow differently, as if the entire area were being separated from the rest of the world. The innumerable plants in the area suddenly went still, as if in death, and then transformed into ash. Chen Heng's corpse instantly withered up, and within the space of a few breaths of time, was nothing more than a skeleton. Even that turned into dust, which crumbled down into the muddy ground. Only Bai Xiaochun wasn't affected. In fact, vast amounts of life force poured into him, rapidly healing his various injuries. The old man stood there with his eyes closed, as motionless as a statue. It almost looked as if he possessed no aura whatsoever, nor any life force. It was like he didn't exist at all within the world, a discarnate soul who refused to be reborn. Meanwhile, in the same moment that Chen Heng died, Patriarch Luochen was back in the Luochen clan in the Fallen Star Mountains. Suddenly, his eyes snapped open, and an uneasy feeling filled his heart. He looked around at the clan members around him, and could see that quite a few of the 11 cultivators sent out of the clan had been killed. However, when he saw that Chen Heng's soul still existed, he felt slightly better. There are only 3 outer sect disciples, how could they have lasted so long, he muttered. So many clan members have been killed. Well, considering the level of Hunger's cultivation base, there's no way they could kill him. Most likely, he's already wiped them out and is on his way back. The uneasy feeling still lurked there inside of him, though. Eyes flickering, he sent a few more clan members out to investigate, all of whom were in the 7th level of qi condensation. Having done that, he took a deep breath. It doesn't matter now. The inverse blood grand magic only needs one more day of work. Gritting his teeth, he suppressed the uneasiness he felt. He knew that there was no backing out of the plan now, and really no other option than to hold on for another day. Then everything would be worth it. In that same moment, Hu Yunfei was in a valley a bit more than 5 kilometers away from the border of Patriarch Luochen's security spell formation. His face was ashen, and he had reached the point where he couldn't take another step further. Coughing up a mouthful of blood, he collapsed to the ground, chuckling bitterly. Junior brother Bai, I'm sorry, I can't save you. He clenched his hands in anguish and helplessness before passing into unconsciousness. In another direction was Du Lingfei, her hair disheveled, her skin sallow. Her qi passageways were almost completely destroyed, and she cut a completely different picture than she had in the past, in her peak of beauty. Her eyes were lusterless, and she looked almost like the Walking Dead. However, a shocking level of willpower kept her staggering forward, clutching a jade slip in her hand. There was only one thought in her head, a thought that wouldn't leave. She had to break free and send word to the sect. She had to save Bai Xiaochun. She proceeded along, one step after another. When she fell to the ground, she would crawl back to her feet. Her clothing was torn, her veins were bleeding dry, and she could barely see clearly. And yet, she kept moving forward. Time passed. Du Lingfei had long since forgotten about the injured state of her body. She wasn't thinking about her own life, nor could she even remember how long she had been walking. She proceeded along until suddenly she experienced a sensation like passing through a sheet of water. In that moment, her eyes began to shine brightly. Am I out? She murmured through parched, cracked lips. Trembling, she looked at the jade slip clutched in her hands, the jade slip which hadn't so much as vibrated once during the past half-month. But now, it vibrated, as though an invisible connection had suddenly been established, linking her to the sect. The Luochen clan has turned traitor. Elder brother Feng died in battle. I'm not sure if elder brother Hu is still alive, and junior brother Bai drew the enemy away so that we could escape. I am disciple Du Lingfei, and I beg of the sect to send backup immediately. As soon as she finished sending the message, Du Lingfei sagged down into a sitting position. Then she turned to look behind her, tears streaming down her face. She would never forget how Bai Xiaochun had returned to fight, as if he had veins of steel. She would never forget the tragic and moving image of him running out to draw the attention of the Luocan clan. She would never forget everything that had happened on their journey together. Junior brother Bai, elder brother Hu, you have to stay alive. Du Lingfei wept, her tears falling to the ground in front of her. Eventually, she couldn't hold on any longer, and collapsed into unconsciousness. As Du Lingfei was transmitting her message, the mission's office back on the fragrant cloud peak in the Spirit Stream sect was as busy as ever. Outer sect disciples were running back and forth handling various tasks, and deep within the mission's office itself, there was a middle-aged man in a Taoist robe who was in the middle of maintaining the records about various missions. Arrayed in front of him was a collection of thousands of jade slips, which contained the information of all sect disciples with open missions. Suddenly, one of the jade slips flickered with light. Expression the same as ever, the middle-aged man waved his hand, causing the jade slip to fly over into his hand. After scanning it with divine sense, his eyes went wide, and he shot to his feet. The Luocan clan has turned traitor, he cried, panting. The enormity of such a matter could not be understated. Whether or not it was true or false, he absolutely had to report the matter to his superiors. Holding back such information was a crime punishable by execution, so he didn't dare to dally. He immediately produced a violet jade slip from his robe and transmitted the new intelligence. The report was instantly sent to the Hall of Justice. Of course, Qian Daijun worked in the Hall of Justice, but he had a very lowly position, and an intelligence report like this was something he didn't even qualify to look at. Almost as soon as the report arrived at the Hall of Justice, the entire organization sprang into immediate action. After all, the Hall of Justice was tasked with defending the entire Spirit Stream sect, and the efficiency with which they went about it was shocking. It only took the time it takes an incense stick to burn to verify the authenticity of the report. Then, war drums began to sound through the entire South Bank. All of the disciples looked around in shock. The outer sect disciples didn't know the significance of the war drums, but the inner sect disciples on the 3 mountain peaks all knew, and it caused their expressions to flicker as they looked up from whatever they were doing. What happened? When the war drums beat, we can't return to the Spirit Stream sect until blood is shed and the enemy clan is exterminated. Heavens! Even as everyone was reeling in shock, the voice of an old man suddenly filled the entire south bank of the Spirit Stream sect. I am Ouyang Jia of the Hall of Justice. All inner sect disciples of the South Bank's 3 mountain peaks are to immediately cancel all previous missions, activities, and secluded meditation sessions. You have 20 breaths of time to gather at the main gate. Tardiness will not be tolerated. Even as the words left his mouth, the inner sect disciples on Green Crest Peak, Fragrant Cloud Peak, and Violet Cauldron Peak immediately dropped whatever tasks they had at hand. Trembling, but without the slightest hesitation, they sprang into motion. Even people involved in important tasks didn't dare to tarry for even a moment. Everyone knew that Ouyang Jia was an elder from the Hall of Justice, and that he was cold-hearted and merciless. He had a Taoist name in addition to his given name. He was known as Taoist Jackal. For him to take the lead in a sect affair meant that something completely infuriating had occurred. It meant that people needed to die. It meant that a clan needed to be exterminated. Rumbling sounds filled the air as countless figures appeared, speeding toward the main gate. Soon it became clear that among the 3 mountains of the South Bank, there were at least 2,000 inner sect disciples. Normally, it was a difficult thing to catch sight of 1 or 2, so the sight of so many left the outer sect disciples completely shaken. There were also several hundred disciples from the Hall of Justice, clad in black robes and led by an old man with bright red hair. That old man radiated intense killing intent, and he was none other than Ouyang Jia. Soon, over 2,000 people were gathered around the main gate, all of whom wore grim and somber expressions. The Luocan clan has turned traitor. The sect leader has ordered that their clan be exterminated all the way down to the chickens and dogs. Activate the Daoseed teleportation portal. Ouyang Jia waved his sleeve, instantly causing a huge pillar of light to rise up from Mount Daoseed, in the middle of the Spirit Stream sect. The light climbed up into the air, transforming into a huge teleportation portal, which instantly enveloped the 2,000 disciples. Rumbling could be heard as the teleportation process began. The outer sect disciples of the South Bank gasped, and suddenly, they were filled with sensations of deep pride regarding their sect. Compared to the Spirit Stream sect, the Luokan clan was small, with only one foundation establishment cultivator. And yet, for the sake of a few outer sect disciples, the Spirit Stream sect had mobilized 2,000 individuals. Then there was the violent and powerful Ouyang Jia. All of that was a mighty threat. It was a threat to all of the cultivator clans in the territory controlled by the Spirit Stream sect. The old saying asks, why use a battle axe to kill a chicken? In this situation, the Spirit Stream sect provided the answer. How else do you kill chickens than with battle axes? This was a sect that wouldn't hold back any resources, not even when it came to outer sect disciples. That in turn caused the outer sect disciples' loyalty toward their sect to reach new heights. The Spirit Stream sect had stood strong for 10,000 years, growing from a tiny little organization to its current height. Naturally, there were aspects to it that others would find astonishing. It was in this moment that, all of a sudden, there on the temple at the very top of Fragrant Cloud Peak, Li Qinghao flew out, face grim, aura murderous. That aura swept out explosively, creating a wild tempest as he shot toward the teleportation portal. It only took Li Qinghao a moment to reach the teleportation portal, where he hovered like an unsheathed blade, radiating an intense murderous aura. Ouyang Jia looked over at him, and his pupils constricted slightly. Among the 3 peak lords on the South Bank, Ouyang Jia viewed Li Qinghao as the most important. In fact, he was actually one of the most important people in the entire Spirit Stream sect. Not only was he a master apothecary, his profound natural talents were extremely rare. For example, he had only practiced cultivation for about 100 years, but had already reached late foundation establishment. In fact, it was even said that, within the entire sect, he was the most likely candidate to break through from foundation establishment and acquire a gold core. I heard that one of those 4 outer sect disciples is connected to Li Qinghao somehow. Ouyang Jia thought. At the same time, rumbling could be heard from the spell formation, and countless dazzling beams of light rose up. Instantly, the group of 2,000 cultivators, including Li Qinghao, became blurry, and then disappeared altogether. The journey, which had taken Bai Xiaochun and the others several months to complete, occurred in only a few seconds, thanks to the activation of the Spirit Stream sect's teleportation portal. Rumbling like thunder filled the air over Du Lingfei's unconscious form. The sky dimmed as something like an invisible hand ripped open a huge rift, revealing the image of an enormous spell formation. It descended rapidly to the ground, causing everything to quake in a 50-kilometer area. Blazing, fiery lines appeared in the ground as the shape and design of the spell formation appeared on the surface of the land. Within that 50-kilometer area, all grass, rocks, mountains, everything turned into ash, vanishing in an instant. This spell formation was incredibly domineering, and destroyed everything that got in its way. Du Lingfei was in that area, and immediately fell under the protection of the spell formation, ensuring she wasn't harmed at all. Even as the land shook, numerous figures came into view. It took only a moment for the more than 2,000 inner sect disciples from the South Bank to appear. There was still enough teleportation power swirling around them for another teleportation to be carried out, but first, Ouyang Jia and Li Qinghao strode forward to the unconscious Du Lingfei. Several female disciples reached her ahead of them, covering her with a set of spare garments and also administering some medicinal pills. With the influx of spiritual energy, Du Lingfei gradually opened her eyes. Her expression was blank, but when she saw all of the forces from the sect surrounding her, she began to weep, and a feeling of excitement flooded through her. Furthermore, considering she was an outer sect disciple of Fragrant Cloud Peak, when she noticed Peak Lord Li Qinghao standing there, even more tears welled up in her eyes. At the same time, disciples on either side of her helped her to rise to a sitting position. "Peak Lord, please rescue junior brother Bai," she implored, face ashen. "What happened to him?" Li Qinghao said, stepping forward to stand directly in front of Du Lingfei. His eyes burned with fury and deep anxiety. Junior brother Bai went out on his own to draw the Luokan clan cultivators away, so that elder brother Hu and I could escape. They started chasing after him. Weeping, she went on to explain the entire situation. Few of the surrounding 2,000 disciples knew Bai Xiaochun, but as they listened to Du Lingfei's tale, they were visibly moved. The intense and tragic events even caused them to gasp. They learned about how Feng Yan fell in battle to protect his fellow disciples, and how Hu Yunfei and Du Lingfei risked almost certain death to try to escape. They heard about how the Luocan clan sent out 2 waves of cultivators in pursuit, including several in the 8th level of qi condensation, and one in the 9th. Even these members of the inner sect would be hard-pressed to make it out alive under such circumstances. When Du Lingfei talked about Bai Xiaochun, they could sense how devoted and loyal he was. In fact, he was already the type of person who could be considered chosen. He had the option of fleeing on his own, but instead returned to save his fellow disciples. He fought enemies far more powerful than himself, then helped carry his 2 wounded companions for more than half a month, on a journey of nearly 5,000 kilometers. In the end, he chose to sacrifice himself rather than his principles, all to give his fellow disciples a chance to make it out alive. The result was that Du Lingfei was able to send her message. Were it not for that, the sect might not have learned about the traitorous actions of the Luocan clan until it was too late. It didn't take long before Bai Xiaochun's name had taken root deep within the hearts of the inner sect disciples. To them, he was profoundly devoted and loyal, an elegant and even heroic man, someone with veins of steel. The people from the Hall of Justice were completely shaken. Among their number was Qian Daijin, whose jaw dropped as he heard Du Lingfei's story. He almost couldn't believe that the Bai Xiaochun she was talking about was the same person in his mind. His impulsive plotting earlier had left him nervous about possible investigations on the part of the sect. Although he hadn't been absolutely sure that Bai Xiaochun was the little turtle, in his pettiness, he would rather kill the wrong person accidentally than risk the right person getting away. As of this moment, he breathed a sigh of relief. With Feng Yan being dead, there was no way word would get out. Even the iron-hearted Ouyang Jia, Taoist jackal, couldn't help but sigh in response to the tale, and a gleam of admiration appeared in his eyes. Considering the level of his cultivation base, he could tell at a glance that Du Lingfei wasn't making the story up. Everything she had said, although perhaps not completely accurate, was the truth. The Spirit Stream sect cannot permit a disciple such as that to perish in this place. Ouyang Jia flicked his sleeve and immediately sent several hundred disciples out to search for Hu Yunfei and Bai Xiaochun. Li Qinghao slowly looked off into the distance, eyes completely bloodshot, heart aching bitterly. Considering what Bai Xiaochun had done here, Li Qinghao suddenly felt as if he had judged him incorrectly. At the same time, he knew that, considering the circumstances, Bai Xiaochun's chances of getting out alive were small, to say the least. And I was the one who brought you to this sect, he thought. His murderous aura exploded out with even more intensity. Taking a step forward, he drew upon some of the remaining teleportation power to suddenly vanish in the direction of the Luocan clan. Ouyang Jia sighed. After hearing Du Lingfei's tale, he knew that the situation did not bode well for Bai Xiaochun. Flickering into motion, he gathered the remaining forces and began another teleportation. Rumbling echoed out in all directions as Li Qinghao and Ouyang Jia led nearly 2,000 disciples to appear in mid-air above the Luocan clan mansion in the Fallen Star Mountains. The cloud layers were ripped apart as the teleportation portal became a powerful attack bearing down with intense energy of heaven and earth. Cries of alarm rang out within the mansion as the spell formation descended upon it. Rumble. The spell formation landed, instantly shattering the limestone flooring, transforming it into ash. The mansion itself collapsed into rubble. Roars of rage echoed out as numerous figures flew out, expressions of fury and hopelessness on their faces. The guardian stone lions and the fruit trees from the courtyard transformed into puppets that instantly went on the offensive. Li Qinghao was the first person to make a move. He waved his sleeve, causing the lions to explode loudly. As for the fruit trees, they trembled, and the fruit began to fall off their branches. However, even as the fruits fled, they were destroyed. Rumbling echoed out as the Spirit Stream sect disciples unleashed mass destruction. Li Qinghao shot toward the center of the destroyed Luocan clan mansion. His right hand flashed with an incantation gesture, and he waved his finger, summoning a green fireball. His hair flew wildly about him as he then sent the fireball blasting down into the ground. Flames erupted, smashing into the rubble of the mansion and sweeping it away. The handful of enemy cultivators who had been attacking let out miserable shrieks as they were instantly incinerated. Next, Li Qinghao lifted his right foot into the air and stamped it down hard. The land shattered, and a huge crevice was ripped open, revealing the necropolis down below. At almost exactly the same time, a vortex of blood spiraled out, followed by the Luokan clan's patriarch. When the man saw Li Qinghao, his face filled with an expression of despair. The spirit stream sect had arrived too suddenly. The spell formation he was working on was on the cusp of being completed, and had anyone else arrived, he might have been able to delay them for long enough. But unexpectedly, the people who came were none other than Li Qinghao and Ouyang Jia. The patriarch fell back, crying out miserably, "Flee! Anyone who can escape, get out of here!" Trembling, the Luokan clan cultivators in the necropolis scattered in all directions. However, Ouyang Jia's face was expressionless as he waved his hand, sending the inner sect disciples after them in pursuit. Li Qinghao's eyes locked onto Patriarch Luokan and the lake of blood that surrounded him. Ouyang Jia did the same, and then, flames of rage appeared in both men's eyes. "You slaughtered innocent mortals?" Li Qinghao growled. "The heavens cannot tolerate the existence of a clan like yours." With that, he waved his sleeve, sending a destructive sea of flames out. At the same time, blood-curdling screams began to rise up as the Spirit Stream sect disciples began to slaughter and crush the Luokan clan cultivators. 2,000 people versus a few hundred. Patriarch Luokan could only watch as everyone in his clan was killed, both descendants from his own bloodline and members of other bloodlines. Screaming miserably, he fled at top speed in an attempt to escape. However, in that instant, he was overwhelmed by Li Qinghao's sea of flames. Face extremely grim, Li Qinghao clenched his hand into a fist. Rumble. Patriarch Luokan's screams intensified as he erupted into flames. His flesh and blood were incinerated, and in the blink of an eye, he was reduced to nothing more than ash. Li Qinghao killed him with one attack. When the surrounding inner sect disciples saw that, they gasped in shock. Even Ouyang Jia's eyes went wide in astonishment. As Li Qinghao hovered there in midair, he waved his hand again, sending the sea of flames exploding out again. The entire Luokan clan was engulfed, and everything began to burn. Li Qinghao looked off into the distance, his expression somewhat disconsolate. Sighing, he said, "Bai Xiaochun, I, Li Qinghao, have let down your Bai clan." In his bitterness, he flew off into the distance. He wasn't willing to entrust the search for Bai Xiaochun to others. If there was even the slightest hope that he was alive, he himself would search for him. Li Qinghao left, flames rising high into the sky behind him. As for the inner sect disciples, expressions of excitement began to appear on their faces. Now more than ever, they realized how powerful and glorious their sect was. As Ouyang Jia watched Li Qinghao leaving, his voice rang out to the surrounding disciples. "Split up and do everything you can to locate Bai Xiaochun. Whoever finds him will receive a reward of merit points from me personally. If you encounter any surviving Luokan clan cultivators, kill them." 2,000 cultivators spent an entire month searching the 5,000-kilometer area. They searched virtually every possible location, but no one ever found Bai Xiaochun. However, they did discover the corpses of the Luokan clan cultivators he had killed. As corpses turned up one after another, the inner sect disciples grew more and more shocked. Virtually all of the Luokan clan cultivators had been killed with a single blow. The inner sect disciples could scarcely imagine how an outer sect disciple in the 6th level of qi condensation could possibly have done something like that. Qian Daijin gasped over and over again, and suddenly realized it would actually be much better for him if Bai Xiaochun was dead. He himself was probably not a match for someone so violent and powerful. Li Qinghao's fury caused him to grow more nervous, and he even began to wail inwardly. "Damn it," he thought, "why didn't you tell me you had such connections? If you had, I would never have provoked you." Eventually they found the corpses of the 3 disciples who were in the 8th level of qi condensation, and they could only imagine what that bitter, intense battle must have been like. It left them reeling. Soon everyone came to the conclusion that Bai Xiaochun had most likely been killed in that nameless mountain range. That was a place rife with perilous beasts, and numerous other dangers that could kill a person and leave no corpse behind. Eventually, they captured the 2 Luokan clan disciples that Chen Heng had dispatched after Hu Yunfei and Du Lingfei. When they learned that one of the people chasing Bai Xiaochun had been none other than the Luokan clan's crown prince, who was in the 9th level of qi condensation, they all resigned themselves to the fact that Bai Xiaochun really must be dead. After the month of searching ended, everyone returned to the sect. Hu Yunfei had been found relatively early on, seriously injured, but alive. With the full power of the sect focused on healing him, he ended up being just fine. Both he and Du Lingfei had performed significant meritorious service for the sect, but that left them with no feeling of excitement. Instead, they felt sadness, and couldn't stop thinking about the events which had occurred. Both of them wanted to go back to join the search efforts when they were underway, but their injuries were too serious. The only person who refused to give up on searching for Bai Xiaochun was Li Qinghao. He journeyed alone into the nameless mountain range, where he searched for 2 full months. Other than a few places that even he couldn't enter, he searched the length and breadth of the mountains. Strangely, even though it seemed clear that Bai Xiaochun had to be in these very mountains, he couldn't find a single trace of him. It was almost as if Bai Xiaochun were currently in some other world. During the process of the search, he ended up fighting quite a few powerful beasts, and was even injured by some of them. 2 months later, it was with great bitterness that he stood in front of a certain tree with a blood-stained scrap of cloth stuck to it. If I hadn't brought you to the sect, Li Qinghao thought. When he closed his eyes, he recalled the image of Bai Xiaochun there on Mount Hood, looking scared to death of the lightning and thunder. He thought about how frightened he had looked at 10,000 Snakes Valley, about what had happened during the sect competition, and about how he had taken first place in all the stone stells. He sighed silently, seemingly growing older as he reached out and picked up the blood-stained cloth. He had already picked up 7 or 8 similar pieces of cloth just like this during his search. In the end, he left the jungle, transforming into a beam of light that shot off into the distance. Thus ended the rebellion of the Luokan clan. The Spirit Stream sect struck like lightning, completely wiping out the traitors. The matter caused quite a stir in the eastward lower reaches of the Heavenspan River. In the cultivation world of the Eastwood continent, which was one of the 4 great continents, countless cultivator clans and sects learned of the matter. As a result, the awe felt toward the Spirit Stream sect grew, a sect that was one of the 4 great sects in the Eastwood lower reaches. After an investigation by the Spirit Stream sect, they found some clues as to why the Luokan clan had turned traitor. The bloodline seal was one reason, but there was an even more profound motivation. After piecing together various clues, the vast ramifications left the Spirit Stream sect shocked. If they hadn't stopped the matter when they did, the resulting chain reaction would have led to numerous other cultivator clans hearing about the matter and then following along in the rebellion. It would have been almost the same as a powerful enemy invading Spirit Stream sect territory, and would have led to grave repercussions, potentially even the destabilization of the sect. The news about the deeds accomplished by Du Lingfei and Hu Yunfei quickly spread, as did the stories of Bai Xiaochun nobly sacrificing himself. The fact that he had refused to abandon his fellow disciples, and had even used himself as bait to lead the enemy away, left many people moved. The cultivation world was full of selfish people. Individuals like Bai Xiaochun were not common. The loss of such a disciple left many people, even the sect leader and elders, feeling very aggrieved. There were other implications that came along with the whole event. However, as more clues came to light, the Spirit Stream sect only grew more silent. For some unknown reason, they eventually stopped investigating. However, all of the Foundation establishment cultivators in the sect increased their level of vigilance to a point far beyond normal. Apparently, a storm was coming. The south and north banks together had 7 peak lords. In addition to that were the sect leader and other elders. After much discussion and research, they came to a unanimous decision. Du Lingfei, Hu Yunfei, as well as the perished Feng Yan, had all performed meritorious service. As for Bai Xiaochun, he had accomplished a tremendous service beyond the ordinary. The final decision was explained by sect leader Zheng Yuandong. A storm is coming. The most important thing is to lift everyone's spirits. For 10,000 years, the morale of our sect has remained high. Considering the tremendous service Bai Xiaochun has performed, at the cost of his very life, we can only repay his kindness by having a grand funeral. Those who contribute to the sect shall never be forgotten. In the following days, although the Spirit Stream sect didn't investigate any further into the reasons for the betrayal of the Luokan clan, they took every opportunity to spread the story of how Bai Xiaochun had sacrificed himself for his fellow disciples, and how he had nobly fought for the sect. As the story was propagated, more and more disciples from the various mountain peaks on both the south and north banks learned of the name Bai Xiaochun and what he had done to save his fellow disciples. Of course, the sect itself wasn't ambivalent to such a devoted and loyal disciple. Li Qinghao had eradicated an entire clan, and 2,000 inner sect disciples had been mobilized. Sending such a powerful force to handle the situation was truly like killing a chicken with a battle axe. Not only did all the disciples in the sect remember Bai Xiaochun's name, they were moved by how the sect reacted to the situation. Even though the sect had obviously reacted in such a way intentionally, that reaction was exactly what the disciples expected. For 10,000 years, that was the unchanging tradition of the Spirit Stream sect. Touch one of our disciples, and you will die, no matter how far you run. When a Spirit Stream sect disciple went outside of the sect, they were never alone, they were backed by the entire Spirit Stream sect. The sect was like a shield, eternally there for their protection. Because of that, the disciples were devoted to their sect, and would expend any and all effort, even give up their lives, to defend it, their home. That was the mighty Spirit Stream sect, which had started out 10,000 years ago as a tiny sect with only a few dozen people in it. In order to determine whether or not Bai Xiaochun was really dead, the sect leader asked for help from one of the sect's prime elders, who was adept at divining information from the heavens. Unfortunately, his divination magic did not reveal any hint that Bai Xiaochun was still alive in the world. The only thing he discovered was an aura of death, which seemed to prove that Bai Xiaochun had died in battle, fighting for the sect. On a rainy morning a few days later, the mournful tolling of bells could be heard throughout the Spirit Stream sect. Countless disciples wearing black robes emerged silently from their residences, expressions grief on their faces as they gathered midway up Fragrant Cloud Peak. There, a gravestone had been erected, with a portrait of Bai Xiaochun on it, smiling happily. Big Fatty Zhang stood there in the crowd. He glanced at everyone around him, and then looked at the gravestone, and Bai Xiaochun's name. As the rain fell and soaked his clothing, he wept, recalling all of his memories of the past. He thought about how they had eaten the various pilfered spirit treasures, about how they had laughed and joked together, about how they had sold spots in the outer sect, and about stealing chickens. Ninth Fatty, Big Fatty Zhang murmured, looking very sad. His heart felt empty, and the pain made the entire world seem dark. The other fatties from the ovens, Bai Xiaochun's elder brothers, were all filled with grief, and couldn't stop crying, including third Fatty He. Xu Baosai, Chen Ziang, Zhao Yiduo and elders Xu and Zhou, as well as everyone else Bai Xiaochun had come to know since joining the sect, all stood in the crowd, faces filled with grief. Zhou Xinqi came and stared silently at the gravestone. After hearing the story of what Bai Xiaochun had done, she couldn't help but think of how zealously he had searched for the chicken thief. Hu Yunfei came, propped up on the shoulder of Hu Xiaomei. He stood there, fists clenched, shaking in grief. Junior brother Bai. A bitter smile twisted his face. After returning to the sect, he began spending his days drinking. He just couldn't forget that moment in which Bai Xiaochun had led all the enemies away, using himself as bait. More and more people showed up, until the middle section of Fragrant Cloud Peak was densely packed with countless disciples, all silently looking at the gravestone. At the front of the crowd was Du Lingfei. Her face was pale, and it was impossible to tell the difference between the tears that streaked down her cheeks and the rainwater. She seemed to be in a daze, and while her face was as beautiful as it had always been, that beauty was now sad and poignant. You could have stayed alive, but here I am, and you're gone. Du Lingfei's days had been spent in sorrow and misery recently. She had lost weight, and often dreamed about that moment in which Bai Xiaochun had returned, unshakable and determined. And then he had left, a scene which left her weeping and racked with pain. As the morning bells tolled, echoing about in all directions, beams of light shot toward the gravestone from all directions. Within them were the 7 peak lords, all of the Spirit Stream sect elders, and even the sect leader. They wore black robes, and as they gathered near the gravestone, their expressions were those of sorrow. As for Li Qinghao, bitterness and self-reproach filled his heart. A moment later, the sect leader began to speak, his voice calm and slow. Bai Xiaochun was an outer sect disciple of Fragrant Cloud Peak in the Spirit Stream sect. He was a blazing sun in the Tao of medicine, a chosen among disciples. In his battle against the Luocan clan, he killed numerous Luocan traitors, and sacrificed himself to save his fellow disciples. He was loyal to his sect, and gave his life in the most tremendous display of meritorious service. Disciples of the Spirit Stream sect will remember his name for all eternity. His voice was filled with grief, and as his voice echoed out, Du Lingfei's tears flowed even harder. Hu Yunfei, Big Fatty Zhang, and countless other people were all weeping. On this day, I confer upon Bai Xiaochun the title of the Spirit Stream sect prestige disciple. In response to the sect leader's words, countless disciples were shaken. To hear the term prestige disciple left everyone moved. That position was a matchless honor within the Spirit Stream sect, and there could only be one prestige disciple within the sect within any generation. It was a position higher than the inner sect, and on equal standing with the legacy echelon. The status of prestige disciple was given to the dead, whereas the legacy echelon was for the most powerful among the living. Throughout the 10,000-year history of the Spirit Stream sect, there had only ever been 9 disciples with such a title, each and every one of whom had been conferred with it after dying in battle for the sect. As of this moment, there were now 10 such disciples in the history of the sect. Not a single person present felt the honor was inappropriate. Bai Xiaochun had earned it with his life. From the time he joined the sect until he sacrificed his life, continued the sect leader, Bai Xiaochun never had a master. Having given his life for the sect, I refuse to allow him to wander alone in the underworld. Therefore, I shall represent my dead teacher, Taoist Master Spirit Sieve, to accept Bai Xiaochun as his apprentice. Henceforth, he can continue to pursue the great Tao in the underworld. In response to the sect leader's words, Li Qinghao nodded, pain flickering in his eyes as he looked at the gravestone. And now everyone shall observe a moment of silence. With that, the sect leader closed his eyes and bowed his head, as did all of the other disciples present. After a few breaths of time passed, the moment of silence ended. Du Lingfei couldn't hold her feelings in any longer, and began to wail. In the same moment that everyone was observing the moment of silence, back in the nameless mountain range, Bai Xiaochun slowly opened his eyes and sneezed. The moment of the sneeze was the same moment that Bai Xiaochun woke up. His mind was still in the same state it had been when he was seriously injured and fallen into a coma, so as soon as he woke up, he subconsciously cradled his left arm and let out a miserable cry. However, as soon as that cry left his lips, he looked down in surprise at his arm, and then at the rest of his body. He began to poke and prod himself, and even opened his garments and looked at his soft, white belly. No injuries? Suddenly, his eyes flickered with fear as he recalled something that the old folks back in the village used to say. Supposedly, when someone died, their soul would enter the shadows of the underworld. At the moment, he obviously had no injuries, which meant that he must only be a soul. Shivering, he looked around and realized that everything around him was dead. Even all the plants and grass were withered up. Chen Heng's corpse was nowhere to be seen. As he looked around, he also noticed fog everywhere. He couldn't see much at all, and everything past a certain distance was a complete blur. A faint aura of death pulsed in the area, causing a cold sensation to wash through his body. That's it. It's over. I was so careful for most of my poor little life, only to end up losing it. Bai Xiaochun was now even more certain that he was now a lost soul. His face twisted bitterly, and he let out an anguished moan. I never even got to give Du Lingfei a chance to pay me back with all her heart. Elder brother who still has his promise to keep. People still don't know that I'm Lord Turtle, and there are still lots of spirit tail chickens to eat in the world. I haven't lived forever yet. The more he thought about it, the more it hurt inside. Tears began to well up in his eyes. However, even as he began to wail loudly, someone cleared their throat behind him. The sound came so suddenly that it startled Bai Xiaochun. Who's there? He shrieked, scrambling forward across the ground and then spinning around, a wooden sword appearing in his hand. He saw an old man standing over by where he had just been laying. He wore a long black robe and looked almost like a corpse as he stared at Bai Xiaochun in a very ghastly manner. His body radiated a strong aura of death. Coupled with the copious amounts of wrinkles which covered his pale face, he seemed like he had just climbed up out of the grave. He perfectly matched his surroundings, and looked utterly horrifying. As soon as Bai Xiaochun laid eyes on him, all the hair on his body stood on end, and he suddenly recalled countless scary stories about murderous ghosts. But then he realized that if he himself was dead, then he didn't have anything to worry about. Sticking his jaw out, he gave a cold harumph and then slowly rose to his feet. All right then, you're a ghost. I'm a ghost. Since we're both dead and both ghosts, then who's afraid of who, huh? He walked up to the old man, then circled around him with a low-pitched, quizzical whistle. You must be a ghost who lives in these nameless mountains. No need to be nervous. I was just passing through and happened to die. I'll be on my way in a moment. I wonder if I can continue to live forever and practice cultivation now that I've become a ghost. Maybe I can become a ghost that lives forever. Suddenly, grief rose up once again in Bai Xiaochun's heart, and he sighed. The black-robed old man looked at Bai Xiaochun and frowned. Then, he spoke in a raspy voice, "How come you're not dead?" Bai Xiaochun started in surprise, then suddenly seemed to think of something. He bit down hard on his tongue, and when the pain coursed through him, he almost couldn't believe it. He bit down again, this time until tears poured down his cheeks. His expression lit with delight, and he literally began dancing up and down. He even threw his head back and laughed loudly. I'm not dead, ha ha ha. I, Bai Xiaochun, have a matchless cultivation base. I am invincible in heaven and earth. How could I possibly die? He was so excited that he reached out to grab the old man's arm, except that his hand passed right through the man, and grabbed nothing but air. At the same time, his hand suddenly felt extremely cold. Bai Xiaochun suddenly went stiff all over. He stared blankly at the old man, eyes wide, before screaming and leaping backward. A ghost. Back when he thought he was dead, he didn't think much of seeing a ghost. But at the moment, he was terrified, as the stories of murderous ghosts once again began to flash through his mind. Soon, he reached the area where the fog grew thick, where he encountered some sort of invisible barrier that he could not pass through. Backing up to the barrier, he gripped his little wooden sword and stared at the old man, countless thoughts fluttering through his mind. Finally, a miserable expression filled his face. Sir, do you have some unfinished business in life that I could help you take care of? The black-robed old man had a strange expression on his face as he studied Bai Xiaochun. He couldn't help but muse that the young man standing in front of him seemed a lot different from the steel-veined fighter from before. They almost seemed like two different people. Eventually, a thoughtful expression appeared in his eyes. Perhaps only people with personalities like this can truly cultivate the undying live forever technique, he murmured. Feeling much more at ease, he shook his head and smiled. Then he turned and began to float off into the distance. The Undying Live Forever technique is divided into the Undying Codex and the Live Forever Codex. Each codex has 5 volumes. What you are cultivating is the most commonly circulated first volume of the Undying Codex, the Undying Skin. You've mastered the iron skin, and have made headway with the bronze skin. As the old man floated off, his voice echoed behind him into Bai Xiaochun's ears. The Undying Codex breaks through the 5 shackles of mortality. The Live Forever Codex unravels the 5 seals of eternity. Work hard at your cultivation. If you can reach the level of Undying Gold Skin, you will make contact with the first shackle of mortality. Whether or not you can break through that shackle will depend on your own good fortune. Since we were brought together by fate, I will give you a medicinal pill. Furthermore, to help you make a breakthrough with your Undying Skin, and achieve mastery of the bronze skin, I will give you this jade slip. It contains the 2nd volume of the Undying Codex, the Undying Heavenly King. 1. If you succeed with the Undying Live Forever technique, you can form a core. By this point, the old man was so far away he couldn't be seen. However, as his voice echoed out, 2 beams of light shot through the air and came to hover in front of Bai Xiaochun. Bai Xiaochun watched in shock as the old man left. At this point, he realized that the reason he hadn't died, and had in fact completely recovered, was because the old man had saved him. And the reason for that was because Bai Xiaochun cultivated the Undying Live Forever technique. Although Bai Xiaochun feared death, he took matters of favors and debts seriously. He knew that he had been injured so badly in the fight that he most likely should have died. A tremor ran through him, and, taking a deep breath, he clasped hands and bowed deeply in the direction the old man had disappeared. Senior, he called out, many thanks for the kindness you showed in saving my life. May I respectfully ask your name? I am the gravekeeper, the old man replied, his voice faint and ancient, almost as if it were floating through countless years of time. It was in that exact same moment that cracking sounds could be heard from the fog as it suddenly vanished. The area which had been separated from the rest of the world was now unsealed, and returned to its place. The wind blew, lifting Bai Xiaochun's long hair as he looked off into the distance. After a moment passed, he murmured, "The undying live forever technique. 5 shackles of mortality and 5 seals of eternity?" This was his first time hearing of such things. Finally, he took a deep breath and looked over at the medicinal pill and jade slip. He first took the jade slip, scanning it with divine sense. Inside was the second volume of the Undying Codex. He put the jade slip away and then looked over at the medicinal pill. Although he was already a journeyman apothecary, he was unable to determine the pill's quality. He took it in hand and began to examine it. He was a cautious person by nature, and he knew that if the old man in the black robe had wished to harm him, he could have done so in a variety of ways. As such, the medicinal pill would most likely bring only benefits, and would not harm him. Muttering to himself, he looked around, then put the medicinal pill away and began to walk. As he proceeded along, he looked around at the jungle and sighed emotionally. When he thought about the whole chase and battle with the Luokan clan cultivators and the danger that had been involved, he couldn't shake the feeling of fear that remained in his heart. I wonder how elder sister Du and elder brother Hu are doing. Did they make their escape? At the moment, he didn't dare to use his jade slip to try to make contact with the sect. He was worried that the Luokan clan cultivators might still be around, and would detect the fluctuations of an attempted transmission. That could lead to a big problem. Patting his bag of holding, he produced Feng Yan's wind skiff, and after a quick test, confirmed that it was now functional. His eyes flashed with joy. Although he had his speculations about the current situation, he wasn't anxious to leave the area, so he found a mountain cave where he could rest for a bit. There, he produced his turtle walk, as well as the medicinal pill given to him by the black-robed old man. Soon, silver light flashed on the medicinal pill, and 3 spirit designs could be seen on its surface. Bai Xiaochun picked up the pill, and his eyes gleamed with determination as he popped it into his mouth and swallowed it. Immediately, his body began to thrum, as though a burning fire were giving birth to an indescribable vital energy, which then coursed through him. He began to shake, and he gritted his teeth, unleashing the undying live forever technique. Then, he slapped himself, revealing that his skin was no longer pitch black, but instead, now contained a bit of bronze. That bronze color was reaching the point where he almost looked like a statue made of the stuff. The power inside of him grew more and more intense, and he felt stronger than ever. However, the energy of the medicine had not been exhausted. After performing the threefold spirit enhancement, the medicinal pill had reached an incredible level of quality. Even in the moment in which his skin was completely bronze, cracking sounds rang out from within him, as if something were breaking. Lines spread out rapidly across the surface of his skin, constantly increasing in number until they covered his entire body. An intense pain racked him, but he endured, and soon, those lines began to turn silver. The undying skin was broken up into the levels of iron, bronze, silver, and gold. Even the black-robed old man could never have anticipated that the medicinal pill he gave to Bai Xiaochun would receive a spirit enhancement, and would thus enable him to break through not just into the bronze skin level, but past it. Rumbling sounds echoed out from inside Bai Xiaochun for several days. More and more cracks appeared on his skin, and soon, pieces of skin began to fall off, almost as if he were molting. Furthermore, every falling piece revealed shining silver beneath it. After 10 days, the last bit of skin had fallen off. He was now completely silver, and although it was a dull silver color, when he opened his eyes, they shone with a bright silver glow. He suddenly burst into motion, causing a shocking boom to ring out. He was now at least twice as fast as he had been before. His eyes shone with joy as his right hand clenched into a fist and slammed into a nearby boulder. The boulder instantly shattered, not into large chunks, but into dust. This level of power exceeded his previous level by several times. Bai Xiaochun was panting excitedly. As of this moment, he was confident that if he fought Chen Heng again, the battle definitely wouldn't be as bitter. After some more tests, something even more shocking was revealed. His defensive levels with the undying silver skin were such that even his wooden sword with the threefold spirit enhancement was incapable of even scratching it. Bai Xiaochun's eyes shone with excitement. After ceasing the operation of the undying live forever technique, his body returned to its normal pure and fair state. He changed his clothes, then began to speed off into the distance, looking very pleased with himself. 1. The word here, Heavenly King, is one of those Chinese words that can be translated many different ways. One slightly more accurate rendition might be Lokapala, but I'm not a huge fan of complicated religious terms like that, especially not in the context of how it's being used here, so I'm going with Heavenly King. Thus, this episode comes to an end. Remember to like and comment so we can discuss the story together. Until we meet again in the next chapters.